My cousin used my poetry to win a competition and claimed I was just the ghostwriter. Years later, I published a book that went viral. His name was in the acknowledgments under Thief Who Lit the Fire. He messaged me, and I replied with a poem I wrote for you once. Now I write about you. I don't remember the first poem I ever wrote, but I remember the first time someone laughed at it. It was on the back of my biology notebook in 10th grade. Some messy scribbles about stars and endings and the quiet ache of being invisible in your own life. My cousin Devin saw it one evening when we were supposed to be studying for finals. He smirked as he read it aloud in a dramatic voice, like he was mocking Shakespeare. Then, halfway through, he stopped, looked at me, said, "Wait, did you actually write this?" I nodded, embarrassed. He went quiet for a beat, then said, "This is weirdly good." That was Devin. Quick to tease, quick to praise, when it suited him. He had that kind of charisma that made teachers forgive late assignments and made girls hang on his every word. I was the quiet one, the tag-along cousin, the creative one in a family that valued results over feelings. Writing was my escape. It always had been. I wrote because I didn't know how else to breathe. Devin and I grew up practically like brothers. Our moms were close, and he was over all the time. But even as kids, I knew we were built different. He wanted attention. I wanted expression. He wanted applause. I wanted peace. Senior year, our school announced a statewide poetry competition with a cash prize and a chance to be published in a local magazine. I was hesitant. My work had always lived in notebooks and hidden Google Docs. But Devin pushed me. "You have to enter," he said one afternoon, flipping through a few of my poems. "You're wasting this if you don't." I finally agreed. I picked 3 of my most personal pieces, raw, painful stuff about losing my dad, about being the weird kid, about heartbreak that had no name. I handed them to Devin to proofread. He didn't say much. Just, "These are solid. You'll win." Weeks passed, and I heard nothing back. I figured I didn't make the cut. Then, one morning in homeroom, our English teacher made an announcement. "Let's all congratulate Devin Parker for winning the state poetry competition." His work was chosen out of over 500 entries. My stomach dropped. I stared at Devin across the room. He was grinning, holding a certificate. I told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe he'd written something of his own. Maybe. But then I saw the title of his winning piece in the school newspaper, "The Loneliest Star." My title, my words, my voice. I confronted him that afternoon behind the gym. "You used my poem." He didn't flinch. "Relax. You weren't going to enter anyway." I did enter. He shrugged. "Not officially. You never submitted." I did. I just improved a few lines. I couldn't breathe. "You stole it." Devin rolled his eyes. "I didn't steal anything. I gave your words a stage. You're like the ghostwriter. Every great artist has one." Ghostwriter. That word burned into me like acid. I told my mom. She told his mom. There was shouting, some vague apologies, but nothing changed. The award stayed his. The magazine printed his name. And the final insult? When I brought it up again months later, he said, "Dude, get over it. It's just one poem." But it wasn't just one poem. It was mine. And something broke in me after that. I stopped writing. For months. Every time I tried, I heard his voice in my head, mocking or minimizing. Ghostwriter. I went to college out of state, studied literature, then creative writing. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was majoring in the thing I'd been told wasn't real. But writing was the only thing that ever made sense. Still, I never showed my work to anyone. I kept my poems buried in password-protected folders and unnamed files. Until my junior year, when a professor caught me writing during a lecture and asked to read it. I panicked, but she was gentle, persistent. I eventually handed over a short free verse about grief and coffee and the smell of rain. She read it in silence, then said, "You need to stop hiding. This is the real thing." That was the push I didn't know I was waiting for. By senior year, I had a working manuscript. By 24, I'd started querying small presses. I got rejections, dozens, but I kept going. Because somewhere along the way, Devin's theft had turned into fuel. Ghostwriter? Fine. I'll write ghosts around your name. Then, out of nowhere, it happened. A boutique publisher in Portland picked up my collection. Said it was aching and luminous. We worked on edits for 8 months. Designed a cover. Finalized the title, Half-Truths and Whole Hearts. I wrote the acknowledgments last. I almost skipped them, too sentimental, but my editor insisted. So I included everyone who had lifted me. And I included Devin, under a single line. "To the thief who lit the fire, I hope you sleep cold." The book launched modestly, but something strange happened. It started spreading. Organically. A TikTok creator with 1.2 million followers found it, cried on camera reading one of the poems, and called it the most honest thing I've read this year. Suddenly, the book was everywhere. Features, interviews, DMs from strangers saying my words saved them. And then came the message. From Devin. No subject line. Just, hey, long time. Saw your book. Congrats. Funny thing, it kinda reminded me of our high school days. Hope you're good. I stared at it for 10 minutes. Then I opened a blank reply and wrote, I wrote for you once. Now I write about you. And I pressed send. Devin never replied. At least, not in words. I saw the read receipt. I know he opened the email. Probably more than once. But he didn't respond. Didn't apologize. Didn't deny it either. Just silence. Classic Devin, really. If he couldn't twist the story to make himself look good, he'd pretend it didn't exist. But it existed now. Publicly. Because not long after that email, I was invited to speak at a local book festival in our hometown. Of all places. I almost said no. Too many ghosts still live there. But then I thought, no. Let them see. Let him see. I said yes. When I stepped onto that little wooden stage in a packed indie bookstore, something in me shifted. I wasn't the shy kid who scribbled poems in the back of biology class anymore. I was published. I was chosen. People came to hear me read. My words. My name. My voice. I read a poem called Cut and Paste. It was about plagiarism, but not in the academic sense. It was about people who cut pieces of you, your heart, your effort, your passion, and paste them onto themselves, calling it their own. It was raw. It was subtle. But anyone who knew would know. After the reading, people came up to me with damp eyes and shaking hands, telling me I had said things they'd never had words for. One woman said, that piece about being a ghost in your own story? I've lived that. Another guy in his 20s told me, you made me want to write again. And then, at the edge of the room, just for a second, I saw him. Devin. He hadn't changed much. Same smirk. Same expensive jacket, just a little more desperate around the eyes. He didn't approach. Didn't speak. Just stood there like a shadow flickering in the corner of a frame. Watching. I pretended not to see him. I let him feel what it's like to be invisible. 2 days later, I got a text from my aunt. She congratulated me on the book, said she bought a copy for her book club, and then added, Devin's a little shaken up. Says you misrepresented him. I stared at the screen, stunned. Misrepresented? He had stolen from me. He had erased me. And now I was the villain in his little redemption arc? I didn't respond. A week passed. And then something happened that I didn't expect. A reporter from a mid-sized lit blog reached out. Said they were doing a feature on emerging poets who turned pain into publication. I agreed to the interview, thinking it would be mostly about craft and process. But somewhere near the end, the journalist asked, the acknowledgments in your book, there's a line about a thief who lit the fire. That struck a lot of readers. Is it metaphorical? I didn't name Devin. I didn't need to. I said, someone once took my work and claimed it as their own. I stopped writing for almost a year because of it, but that betrayal ended up fueling the book. So in a way, I owe them. The interviewer smiled. Poetic justice. Exactly. That line, poetic justice, became the title of the blog article. It spread fast. Even people outside of poetry circles started sharing it. Some called it inspirational. Others commented with their own stories of stolen credit, invisible labor, and silenced voices. One day, I woke up to hundreds of new followers, dozens of DMs, and a weird sense of peace. Then came the second message from Devin. It was short. 5 words. Can we talk? Coffee. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit. 2 days. Then 3. Finally, I wrote back. What would we talk about? He replied within 10 minutes. I messed up. I know I did. But I was a kid. You're everywhere now. I just want to explain. I read it over and over. That subtle deflection. I was a kid. He had been 17. So had I. We'd both been kids. But only one of us had weaponized that age to strip credit from someone else. I agreed to meet, but I picked the location, an old, quiet cafe near campus. The kind with mismatched chairs and handwritten menus. No distractions. Just 2 cups of coffee and a decade's worth of unsaid things. When I walked in, he was already there. He stood when he saw me. Nervous smile. Hey. I nodded. Sat down. There was silence for a minute. Then he said, I deserved that line in the book. I didn't say anything. I was a piece of shit. He went on. I knew it was your poem. I just, I was scared I'd never be good at anything. And people liked your stuff. I thought if I could just get a little recognition." He trailed off. I waited. I told myself you wouldn't care, that it wasn't a big deal. But it was. Still, I stayed quiet. Let him speak. He leaned back. "You don't have to forgive me. I'm not asking for that. But I needed you to know that I've thought about it every time I pick up a pen since." That part hit me. I finally said, "I stopped writing for almost a year because of you." "I know," he whispered. "And yet, I also wrote because of you." He looked up. That anger? That betrayal? It was ink. And fire. And every poem that book birthed had your fingerprints in the ash. He nodded, slowly. I stood. "We're not friends. We're not enemies. We're a cautionary tale. For both of us." And I left. I didn't look back. But I swear I heard him whisper, "Fair enough." After that cafe meeting, I didn't hear from Devin again. Not a text. Not an email. Not even a social media like. And that was fine by me. There was something about looking him in the eye, hearing him admit it, that scraped the final layer of bitterness off my chest. Not because I forgave him. I didn't, not fully, but because I no longer needed his apology to move on. I had already moved. He was the one still standing in the same spot, trying to explain footprints. The months that followed were strange in the best way. My book kept gaining traction. What started as a modest indie release turned into a cult favorite in certain circles. Book clubs, college poetry forums, even a few classrooms. I started getting invited to panels, workshops, Zoom interviews with soft-spoken moderators and bright-eyed aspiring writers who'd say things like, "Your poem Glass Spine helped me through my parents' divorce," or "I printed Left on Red and taped it to my dorm wall." It was surreal, especially because Glass Spine was the one Devin had stolen. I had rewritten it, of course, sharpened it, reworded the metaphors, broken the lines differently, but the soul of it was still mine. Always had been. Now, it was helping other people heal, too. That poem had been taken from me once, and now it was giving something back. Full circle. But with visibility came complications. A few weeks after my second podcast interview aired, I got an anonymous DM. "Don't you think dragging your family's name through the mud over one teenage mistake is pathetic?" I didn't engage. I didn't need to. It was probably one of Devin's extended relatives, or maybe someone from back home who still thought I was being petty. Small towns have long memories and even longer loyalties. Some people believe success should be silent, that if you'd been wronged, you were supposed to move on without ever mentioning it again. Especially if the person who hurt you was related, or popular, or meant well. But I wasn't doing this out of spite anymore. I was telling the truth. And for every anonymous DM, I got 50 more messages from people thanking me for giving them permission to be loud about what happened to them. To not shrink. To not erase themselves just because someone else had once done it for them. One woman messaged me from Brazil. She was a poet too. Said her best friend had stolen her work and won a National Youth Prize with it. She never told anyone because she didn't want to cause drama. She said, "Reading your story made me finally tell mine." That meant more than any award. But speaking of awards, something unexpected happened that fall. I was shortlisted for the Moral Prize for Emerging Voices, a small but respected literary award given to writers under 35 who showed courage, originality, and emotional craftsmanship. I didn't think I'd win. I was up against novelists, memoirists, even a spoken word artist whose performance had gone viral. Still, I showed up to the ceremony in a thrifted black suit and worn-out sneakers, heart thudding in my ears. The MC read my name. I froze. I walked to the podium with trembling hands. The applause felt distant, like it was happening through water. But once I stood in front of the mic, I looked at the crowd and realized I wasn't nervous. I was ready. I said, "When I was 16, I wrote a poem that meant everything to me. Someone I trusted took it, put their name on it, and won a prize. I didn't write for a long time after that. I thought maybe I wasn't meant to. That maybe my voice only mattered if someone else spoke it. But it turns out pain has a weird way of fermenting into something usable. That poem eventually found its way back to me. Not the exact lines, but the heart of it. The voice. I found it again. And now, it's finding other people. That's the power of truth. You bury it, it grows roots." The room was quiet after that. And then the applause returned, louder this time. Warmer. Real. Later, at the reception, a young woman approached me with a copy of my book clutched to her chest. "I want to be a poet," she said. "You already are," I replied. "You just have to believe your voice is worth hearing." She asked me to sign her copy. I wrote, "Write loudly. Never ghost yourself." When I got back to my apartment that night, I found another message waiting for me. It was from Devin. Subject, saw the speech. Body, I didn't know you were up for that award. You earned it. Even back then, your writing was better than mine. I guess I just couldn't stand being second best. I'm not asking for anything. Just wanted to say, you deserved it all along. I read it twice, then archived it. Not out of cruelty, just peace. I no longer needed his validation. I didn't need him to see me, because I finally saw myself. And for the first time in years, I started writing a new poem, not about the past, not about revenge, not even about healing, just about me. That was the true victory. I didn't reply to Devin's email. There wasn't anything left to say. Maybe once upon a time, I would have clung to those words, dissected them, tried to squeeze some kind of closure from them like juice from a rind. But not anymore. That version of me, the one who waited for recognition like it was oxygen, was gone. Still, his message lingered in my head for days. Not because I cared about his approval, but because it made me think about how we measure justice. Some people want revenge to look like punishment. I thought I did too. For a long time, I pictured Devin humiliated, exposed, dragged through the digital dirt. But it didn't come to that. He still had his job, his social life. No one had canceled him. And yet, I wasn't angry. Because I'd built something he never could, a reputation that didn't need lies to exist. My words had finally traveled further than his theft ever did. A few weeks after the award, my editor called me about something unexpected. My book was being considered for a high school curriculum pilot in 3 states. One of the board members had seen my Morrow Prize speech and pushed the book for its accessible emotional range and themes of personal agency. I said yes before she even finished the sentence. It was surreal to imagine students, maybe even students like me, anxiously flipping through dog-eared pages of a book I'd once been too scared to even write. That night, I dug through my old folders and found a scan of the original poem Devin had stolen. The one I wrote on college-ruled notebook paper, half of it smudged by tears and cheap ink. I hadn't looked at it in years. The lines were raw, unpolished, but they were mine. That version had never been published. So I typed it out exactly as I had written it back then and posted it online under the title, "The Poem I Wrote Before I Knew It Had Value." It went viral in a way none of my polished work ever had. Thousands of likes, reblogs, comments from readers saying things like, "This sounds like me at 17," or "I didn't know someone else felt this too." A teacher emailed me asking if they could print it out and post it in their classroom. A few people asked, "Why does this feel so different from your recent poems?" And I told them the truth. Because this one was written before I started protecting myself. Before I learned to tuck my feelings into metaphors and hide pain behind meter and structure. This was me, bare. And somehow, that made it resonate more than anything else. One night, I checked my social media DMs again. A message from a familiar name stopped me cold. Devin's little sister. We hadn't spoken in years. She was just a freshman when Devin and I were seniors. Back then, she was quiet, always tagging along to readings and open mics with a notebook too big for her backpack. Her message was short. "I'm sorry for what he did. I always knew you were the real writer. I used to sneak your old poems and copy them into my sketchbook just to feel close to something honest. You made me want to write. You still do." That one hit harder than anything Devin ever said, because it reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Sometimes, your silence helps someone else speak. I didn't know she'd been watching. That my stolen words had still inspired someone. That even when Devin had taken credit, the essence had been real enough to spark someone else's fire. I wrote back, "You don't owe me any apology. Just promise me you'll keep writing. And this time, sign your name in big, bold letters." She sent back a photo of one of her poems written on the back of a napkin. It was about shame and survival and becoming more than what someone else decided you were worth. It was beautiful, and I cried for the first time in months. Not because I was sad, because the cycle had broken. Someone who once thought their voice wasn't good enough had finally decided it was. And that was worth every sleepless night, every knot in my stomach, every year I'd spent second-guessing whether telling my story had been the right move. Because this right here, was the impact. That same week, my publisher reached out about doing a second book. This one would be broader, part memoir, part poetry collection, part reflections on creativity and ownership. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I said yes anyway. And when they asked who I wanted to thank in the acknowledgments, I didn't hesitate. There was a section titled, "People Who Lit the Fire," and under it, To Devin, who once called me a ghostwriter. Turns out ghosts are made of memory. And mine refused to stay quiet. It wasn't about pettiness. It was about truth. I wasn't haunted anymore. I was heard. The book launch for my second collection felt nothing like the first. The first time, I was nervous, almost timid, like I was waiting for someone to jump out and say, "Just kidding, this isn't really yours." But this time I stood behind the mic with steady hands, a spine made from everything I'd survived, and a crowd full of people who weren't just there for poetry. They were there for me. The venue was small, cozy. Fairy lights, folded chairs, free coffee, people flipping through advanced copies of Ghostwriter No More, tracing their fingers over highlighted lines like they were secret messages. I spotted a few familiar faces: my old poetry professor, a local radio host who gave me my first feature, a woman who'd emailed me 3 months ago saying one of my poems had gotten her through her mother's funeral. They weren't here to clap politely. They were here to celebrate a voice they'd seen grow. My voice. I started with a piece called Copyright, written the day after I got Devin's first apology email. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't angry. It was clean. Just a quiet reclaiming of everything I used to hand away without question. The final stanza read, "I used to write like no one would read it. Now I write like someone will steal it, and I leave fingerprints on every line, so no one forgets who bled here first." After the applause, I looked up and saw her, Devin's sister. Front row. Notebook open. Pen ready. She smiled at me, nervous, like she thought I'd call her out or ignore her. But I nodded instead. Gave her the quiet kind of acknowledgement that only people with shared scars understand. After the reading, she came up to me. "I'm publishing my first chapbook this fall," she said. "One of the poems is called Stolen Fire. It's about you." I laughed, not out of pride, but something gentler. "Make sure you tell people that part." She nodded. I already did. As people lined up for book signings, someone handed me a dog-eared copy of my first collection. Inside, they'd marked every poem that started as a journal entry from the year Devin had stolen mine. "You really showed him," they said with a wink. But that wasn't the victory anymore. I didn't need to show anyone. The win was simply this: I built a stage no one could push me off of again. A few months later, something odd happened. I was invited to speak at a national writing conference. One of the keynote panels was titled Authorship, Credit, and Creative Theft in the Digital Age. Guess who else was on the list? Devin. I thought about declining. I had nothing to prove. But then again, maybe this wasn't about proving. Maybe it was about standing in the light I used to be afraid of. I said yes. The panel room was huge. Probably a few hundred people. Writers, students, publishers, educators. Devin and I were seated at opposite ends of the table. When I walked in, he glanced at me, then quickly looked down at his notes. I didn't acknowledge him. I wasn't there for him. The moderator asked us to talk about integrity and the line between influence and theft. Most people gave diplomatic answers. It's complicated. Sometimes things are subconscious. We need to have open conversations. When it was my turn, I leaned forward and said, "If someone takes your words and claims them as their own, it's not flattery. It's theft. Full stop. And the damage isn't just to your ego. It's to your foundation. Because when you're a young writer, your voice is all you have. And when someone tells you it isn't yours, that echo takes years to silence." There was a pause, and then applause. Not polite, either. Full, loud, supportive. Devin didn't speak again after that. That night, I got an email. Not from Devin. From a young poet who had been in the audience. "I almost stopped writing last year when someone lifted my whole poem and got it published. I thought no one would believe me because they were more known than me. But after hearing you speak, I submitted to 3 new journals. And I signed my name in all caps." That was it. That was everything. Sometimes, people ask me if I ever fully forgave Devin. The answer is, I don't need to. I don't carry him anymore. He's just a line in my story now. Not the climax. Not the villain. Just a lesson. Because in the end, the revenge wasn't the acknowledgement or the viral poem or the keynote applause. It was that I no longer needed him to validate me. I found my worth on my own terms. So when people talk about poetic justice, I smile. Because justice didn't come in flames. It came in verses. In quiet survival. In sign names. And most of all, in the fire that stayed lit. Even after someone tried to steal the spark.